Is DNA testing finally happening in the West Memphis 3 case? Let's talk about it. So, West Memphis 3, now we could look at that as West Memphis 3, the three men that were convicted of the crime, or West Memphis 3, the three young boys that lost their lives that day back in the 90s in Robin Hood Hills in West Memphis, Arkansas. Let's talk about the victims in that case. So one of the victims was Stevie Branch. Stephen Edward Branch was born November 28th, 1984. He would be, 40 years old now? At the time of his murder on May 5th, 1993, Stevie Branch was in the second grade at Weaver Elementary School. He would have been getting very close to finishing out that second grade year. According to things that I found online, Stevie was a very good student. He was liked by his classmates. He was easy to recognize because he had really blonde hair and he was super friendly. Stevie's parents divorced when he was pretty young, and he had a stepfather named Terry Hobbs. Now, Terry Hobbs and Stevie's mom had a child together. So Stevie has a younger half-sister named Amanda. If you're familiar with the case, you might know Terry Hobbs is the one that people really feel like was responsible for this murder, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So Stevie's grandfather gave him a bicycle just before the murder. On the night of May 5th, Stevie's mom, Pam, had to go to work. She worked an evening shift at Catfish Island there in West Memphis. But just before she left for work, she gave Stevie permission to go out and play with his friend, Michael Moore. After Michael Moore stopped by the house and asked if they could go ride bikes together, she gave Stevie permission to stay out until 4:30 p.m. Now, it's interesting to note that Terry Hobbs allegedly left the house to take Pam to work. So what happened? What did Terry Hobbs do after he took Pam to work? I don't know. Another one of the victims is named Michael Moore. So Michael Moore's name was James Michael Moore, and James Michael Moore, who was also known as Mike, was born on July 27th, 1984. He too would be 40 years old. So Michael was a leader. He liked to participate in Cub Scouts, as you can tell by the picture, and he enjoyed pretending to be an officer of the law. Maybe if he had been allowed to grow up and be an adult, that's what he would have been. So on May 5th, Michael ran over to Stevie's house on his bike. The two of them were going to go out and ride around in the neighborhood. Like I said before, Stevie had just got that bike and the weather was good that day. So Stevie's mom allowed him to go out and ride bikes until 4:30. And the third of the friend group was Christopher Byers. Christopher was also called Christopher Murray. Now, he was born on June 23rd of 1984. Also, he was in the second grade, just like the other two boys. Now, Christopher was called Chris by his family and friends, and he lived with his mother and his stepfather. So his mom's name was Melissa Byers. Stepfather was John Mark Byers. Chris had an older half-brother that was a few years older than him, and Chris was pretty new to the friend group between Michael Moore and Stevie Branch. Now, in May of 1993, Chris was having problems with his ADHD, which, back then was treated completely different, I feel like, than it is now. So Chris had ADHD. It was medicated, but his doctors couldn't figure out why his behavior wasn't improving. According to Pam Hobbs, who is Stevie's mom, she saw Chris come over to her house around 3:30 in the afternoon. Chris came over looking for Stevie, but Stevie had already left the house to go ride bikes with Mike. So Chris sat down with Stevie's little sister Amanda and watched the Muppet Babies while he waited for Stevie and Michael to get back from riding bikes. But Chris left Stevie's home at around 4 p.m. So The last sighting of Chris is different than the last sighting of Stevie and Michael. Obviously, Chris did connect with Stevie and Michael at some point in time, but Chris, before he connected with Stevie and Michael, was found riding his skateboard. He was laying on the skateboard on his stomach and going down the street. So Chris's dad caught him doing that, took him home and spanked him, and told him to clean the carport before he left to go pick up Ryan, Chris's brother, from court. Now, Ryan was at court because he was allegedly testifying in a reckless driving case of some sort at the county courthouse. According to Chris's mom, she last saw him about 5:45 p.m. that day. She said he was outside cleaning up the carport. He came in the house a couple of times, and then he left to go meet up with Stevie and Michael, which, again, we know because of how they were found. So these were the three victims, Stevie, Michael, and Christopher. The question is, are they the only victims in this case? Were Damien, Jesse, and Jason also victims? I think that's something that DNA could answer. But let's talk about Jesse, Jason, and Damien. Also, let's talk about the crime itself. We'll do some of that in the next part.